It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to Your Personal Bank Show. There is so much going on right now, particularly from the economic standpoint. I literally have like a dozen articles that I could refer to on things going on. So we're going to try to blast through some of these things, the more important ones. And again, the focus of this show is about how it affects you, how it affects all of us, our money, how we earn it, keep it, and pass it on to the next generation, right? How do we do all those things? Obviously, we want to gain control of our money. We want to reduce our taxes. In most cases, we want to reduce market risk. Gaining positive arbitrage is always nice too. Bottom line is, if you can gain 1% positive arbitrage, that's 1% more money that you wouldn't have had any other way had otherwise, obviously. But anyway, some of the things that are going on right now, I think the biggest thing that's been getting people's attention recently is the proposal in the Build Back Better bill that they're arguing about. And again, you may be listening to this at some point in the future or in different stations or whatever. If you go to yourpersonalbank.com, you can listen to any of the previously recorded shows. So the bill might have passed in some form or fashion or whatever, but the thing is, we need to bring this up now and let our representatives know where we stand on this stuff, and let our voices be heard. Right? Contact your representatives, your senators, and such. Let them know how you feel. It's the only thing we can do at this point in terms of this bill. There has been significant pushback in many areas. Things are getting changed. Things are getting reduced and adjusted. So we do still have a voice. We do still have some power. So we need to use it while we got it. Use it or lose it, right? So the biggest thing, like I was starting to say, that I think has gotten a lot of people's attention is this plan of having banks report transactions to the IRS of $600 or greater. Literally, this is what the Democrats want. It's in the bill. It's not what anybody's saying. I always say, what you do, speak so loudly that what you say I cannot hear. Forget what the politicians are saying. This was sold to us as everybody paying their fair share, going after the millionaires and billionaires. Yet, when it comes down to it, in writing, in the bill, what the Democrats want is for banks to report every $600 or greater bank transaction, to the IRS. Look, I am fervently hopeful that this gets removed or adjusted from the bill. So far, there's been a lot of pushback. They're talking about adjusting the amount, but the reality is the IRS has no business snooping in our business. They don't have any business snooping in our bank accounts. Whatever happened to privacy, freedoms, search and seizure? I mean, the police can't just come in and bust your door down, right? They have to get a court order, a search warrant, right? So what's the difference here? Why can the IRS just automatically snoop in your bank accounts, require banks to send them transaction records? I mean, we know for years that this has been the case on transactions in excess of $10,000. There's been little pushback on that, but frankly, it's not about the amount of money, it's the principle that's wrong here. Again, why does our government, why does the IRS have the right to get notified about a transaction that somebody has made, irregardless of the amount, frankly, unless there is some reason for them to do so? In other words, they have a court order, a search warrant, so to speak. They get a court. They should have to go to court and get a warrant to require the bank then to release transaction records because they have valid reason to think that this person might be doing something illegal or unethical or whatever it may be. Just to get automatically notified about every transaction in excess of $10,000, which has been happening for years now, is a violation of private personal rights. It's a violation of our privacy, and it should be stopped. That's what we should be telling our representatives. Now, the $600 amount is what's really gotten everybody's attention because what they've come to realize, obviously, is that this idea of it's about paying your fair share and going after the millionaires and billionaires, then finding out that $600 transactions are going to be required to be reported. $600 is not going after millionaires and billionaires, folks. That's going after literally just about everybody. I've said this before. If my teenage daughter went and got a part-time job and she got paid weekly, she could have transactions in excess of she could get paid more than $600. So she'd have a deposit in her account of more than $600, and the IRS would be notified of that. Again, it's none of their business. They have no reason to be snooping on my teenage daughter's bank account, for example, or yours or mine or anyone else's for that matter, unless they have a legitimate, valid reason to do so. And they should have to have a court order, like a search warrant, that agrees with them that they have sufficient evidence or reason to believe that there is something going on here that's nefarious, illegal, or unethical. This is a situation where we have a government agency snooping on people that are guilty until proven innocent. The Constitution says the opposite, doesn't it? Innocent until proven guilty. My hope is that this pushback, if the pushback occurs hard enough, again, contact your representatives, contact your senators, and let them know that this bank reporting requirement is unconstitutional, unethical, illegal, and not right. It's just not right. It's a surveillance society is what they're wanting to create, where they're literally surveying people's finances, all of us, and everything we do, basically. Is that the kind of society you want to live in? And like I said, and I've said this before, folks, look, whether this passes or not, whether this gets adjusted or not, and again, I fervently hope it does, remember, this is what the Democrats wanted. They put it in writing. 48 senators have voted in favor of this. A majority, almost all the Democrats in the House have done the same. The only holdouts, basically, at this point, seem to be Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. Now, interestingly, at this point at least, Manchin is not so much concerned about what's in the bill, it seems like. He's willing to spend money. He's just concerned about the amount that's being spent. Of course, the bill is the way it's written or submitted is like $3.5 trillion, which literally would be, I believe, the largest spending bill in the history of our country. I don't even think the history of our country. It's the history of mankind. Okay, this is a huge, massive, massive amount of money. It's an unfathomable amount of money. It would be equivalent to more than 10% of our total debt as it exists right now. We're at something like roughly 28 trillion, as of late to 2021. If we spend another 3.5 trillion, folks, that's another more than 10% of the total debt that we've incurred completely, the total amount, okay? The total federal debt. That's an incredible amount of money. Manchin's objection seems to be he's not willing to spend $3.5 trillion. To his credit, I'm with him on that, as are, I think, a majority of Americans, vast majority. He's willing to go to about $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion or whatever, depending on who you talk to. Look, I think the 1.5 is far too much. I don't think we should spend another dime. Our federal government has already spent far too much, where there's far too much debt. And I understand there's people out there that talk about, well, the ratio of debt to GDP of the United States is less than other countries like in Western Europe or other parts of the world. Let me share something with you, folks. I don't want to be Western Europe or other parts of the world. Does that make sense? I'm half Hungarian. I've shared this many times. My dad escaped from the Soviets in the 56 and from Hungary. He escaped here legally, got political asylum, all that good stuff. And I was born here, so I'm first generation. So that's my heritage. I've been to Europe many times. I have family that still live there, have some friends. Folks, I understand a lot. I know much more about what the average European, Western and your Eastern European lives like, what their lifestyle is, what they live, than most Americans do. Which is sad. We should be more educated. We need to be more educated than we are in many cases. But here's the reality. Their life isn't all that great. There's not that much opportunity. When you see surveys about the happiest countries in the world, and oftentimes it's the Scandinavian countries that lead the list, understand the pollsters, when they ask the questions, oftentimes the questions are asked or more translate not is are you happy, but are you satisfied? See, in Europe, Western Europe in particular, most people make about the same. Most of them live in their small flats or apartments. They drive a small car if they have one. Okay, everything's much smaller in most cases. And the reason is, a lot of people think it's quaint and it's cute and it's nice to visit. It is. But it's smaller for a reason. For one, they can't afford anything else because the level of taxes that most Europeans pay approaches half of what they earn. And yes, they have cradle-to-grave health care. They have cradle-to-grave education. But that's really, really expensive. You could buy it privately far cheaper, and we do in the United States, still even today, even with all the problems that we have. If we allowed the free market enterprise system to actually, hey, I'm in the insurance industry. I understand. If we allowed our health insurance fields to just be a free market situation, the costs would drop dramatically. Folks, I'm in the industry. I know what the costs are. I know how it works. All right, I know the inside. If we got the government and providers, business providers, to get out of insurance and let people just purchase their own, the costs medical expenses and insurance would drop dramatically. Free enterprise would take over. Competition would take over. You can say that the same thing about education. You can say that the same thing about just about anything. Look, Ronald Reagan had it right. Government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. Government gums things up, makes it more complicated, and costs more. Okay, creates middlemen. Almost anybody understands this. If you have a middleman in a business transaction, you've increased the cost because there's a middleman, right? That person has to get their piece. Well, if the government's involved, they become a middleman. They don't produce anything. Remember, the government has no money. The government makes nothing, produces nothing, does not create or provide jobs. Based on their regulation authority and how much they get in or out of the way of business can influence the number of jobs, but they don't create any jobs, okay? There can be government jobs, but those are also funded by taxpayers or them printing more money, which creates more inflation that everybody pays for. We've talked about this many times. I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I want to touch on some of these other things and also this bank transactions and some solutions, some things we can do to protect ourselves, to give ourselves more privacy. So stay tuned. Don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We're talking a lot about the economic situations that are occurring right now. They're fast and furious. There's a lot of them, so we're going to try to cover today a lot of the most important ones. The first one I've really been touching on or hitting on is the proposed requirement for banks to report to the IRS any transaction in excess of $600. Folks, this means your banking, checking, savings accounts, anything, any type of account you have with a bank, if there's a transaction going in or coming out over $600, the IRS or the bank will have to report that to the IRS. This basically, for a lot of people, and particularly think about this, for a lot of businesses, there's many businesses out there, including my own, that there are few transactions below $600. Majority of the transactions are that amount or above. In other words, it turns into constant surveillance. Do we want to be constantly under surveillance by the IRS? I've worked with a lot of clients over the last couple decades or so, and I've had a lot of clients with experiences dealing with the IRS. Few, if any, are pleasant. Inviting the IRS into our lives just sounds to me like a recipe for stress. And that's if you're doing nothing wrong. I'm not talking about it's just, think about it. It's stressful when you get a letter in the mail from the IRS. Irregardless of the reason. You could have been doing nothing wrong, and it's just stressful. It's frustrating, okay? Is this the kind of life we want to live? Is that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, like in the Declaration of Independence? I think not. I think it's the direct opposite of that. And also in this bill, they're talking about tripling or more the budget for the IRS, meaning they can hire many more revenue agents to surveil us, to keep their eye on us. I mean, I envision situations where people will be receiving multiple letters per year, per quarter even, some even per month, or notifications, whatever, from the IRS asking to explain this transaction or that transaction, particularly if it doesn't line up with their information or their number, say on a recent tax return. Look, again, you could be doing nothing wrong, but something in their system, their computer system, creates a red flag, which generates a letter, which means you've got to respond to that letter. It means you've got to explain yourself, produce documentation, receipts, or whatever. And if you what happens if you fail to have kept that receipt? Well, then if that was happened to have been an expense you had written off, then it could be disallowed by the IRS, which means you would then pay more taxes. It was a perfectly legitimate business expense. You just didn't happen to have the proper documentation at that time. Guess what? You get to pay the piper, right? This is how they'll be able to collect more money. Also, you could have a perfectly legitimate business expense. I've experienced this myself personally and with many clients, where the IRS looks at it. You may have the receipt and everything, and then they choose to disallow that expense because for whatever reason they determine it's not acceptable in their mind. Although you know perfectly well it was absolutely legitimate business expense. Where do you go? How do you fight that? Again, in most cases, you could hire an attorney or go to court or whatever, but the costs to do that are more than what the extra tax would be to pay it, so most people just pay the tax. Again, another way for them to collect more from people who are, frankly, doing nothing wrong. Again, is this the type of life you want to lead? So a solution to this, and before I get to the solution, one last thought. Don't ever forget whether this becomes law or not, whether this is passed or not, irregardless of the amount, whether it's $600 or $10,000 or any amount in between. Frankly, in my opinion, IRS has no business being in our noses, in our business. They have no business being in our business unless they have a legitimate reason to do so, like a court order, like a search and seizure order, like the police have to have. My point is this: remember, who's proposing this? Who put this in a bill and is trying to pass this? The Democrats. Have any Republicans voted in favor? No. To their credit, the only two holdouts happen to be two senators, Manchin and Sinema. Manchin is mostly against the total amount being spent. He's wanting to spend maximum of something like $1.5 trillion instead of $3.5 trillion. Granted, that's better, but I think zero is the best number here. The government's spent far too much. They already owe $28 trillion. What are they doing spending another 1.5 or 3.5? Come on, they got no business doing that. Not with that kind of debt. And then Sinema, to her credit, doesn't want to increase taxes. Now, I'm actually more I'm more favorable of her position, and although I did not support her, she is a Democratic senator. To her credit, I'll give credit where it's due. She's standing up for no more taxes. And I hope she stands her ground. Both senators are getting attacked. Sinema ferociously. She's getting followed. If you haven't heard about it, she's getting followed by protesters even in the bathroom. I mean, that's beyond ridiculous. Okay. My point is, if you're in West Virginia or Arizona, contact Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema. Contact them and tell them to hold firm. They are under a tremendous amount of pressure from their own party, from many, just a lot of people. There's many of their supporters. I just read another article where more big supporters of Sinema are pulling out. She's losing supporters over this on one hand, but I can tell you this, she's gaining a whole lot more supporters on the other. If she holds out for no new taxes, I will support her in that. And, again, give credit where it's due. Let Senator Manchin know where you stand. If people say, well, I'm just one person, I can't make the difference. Look, probably not 1 in 10,000 voters will ever contact their representative or their senator. So think about that a minute. If that's, I don't know what the number is. I'm just guesstimating. If it is 1 in 10,000, let's say, and you are the one who reaches out and lets them know how you feel, send an email, send a message, write a letter, do these things. We need to barrage them, because here's the thing. If it is 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 1,000, you're going to be the voice for 1,000 people or 10,000 people. You see what I mean? There's a lot of power in that. We should be bombarding them with messages. Hold firm, stand firm, don't raise taxes, don't raise spending. We've spent too much. Enough's enough. And hopefully they'll stay firm in their commitment, because you know they're getting attacked dramatically. Help them stay firm and let them know she's losing. Senator Sinema, of course, is losing supporters. She might be losing some of her former supporters, but she's gaining a whole lot of new ones by standing firm. Let her know that. That'll help her stand firm in this. Look, I have never supported a Democrat in my political career, because I've always felt they spend too much. Look at this is a perfect example. But when you have a situation where there's one actually willing to stand up for no new taxes or less spending, we need to support them in that. Because right now we're in damage control. Frankly, there is no other choice, okay? This isn't sacrilegious. This is being practical. We have to protect the economic future of our country for ourselves and for the next generations. Stay tuned in the next segment. I was going to talk about what you can do to protect yourself. I didn't get there quite yet. I will do that in the next segment, I promise. So stay tuned. Don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We're talking about recent proposals, various things that our government is proposing to do to us economically that will affect us in a significant way. The $600 transaction requirement of banks to report $600 transactions to the IRS could potentially be a game changer in terms of our freedoms versus a surveillance society. Will be no different than Russia or China or Cuba or any of those places. North Korea. It'll be, in many ways, it'll be, what's the difference? But we'll move on from that. There's, again, let your senators and congresspeople know how you feel. Communicate with them. Contact them. Tell them this is beyond ridiculous. It's not acceptable to have the IRS spying on people for no reason, okay? So some other ones that are of interest is like Biden, because the White House is insisting that the corporate tax hike is still on the table, because they're discussing this Build Back Better bill. I don't know if it's going to pass, in what form or fashion it's going to pass. The less, the better. The less spending, the better, in my opinion. But here's the thing. If the corporate tax hike still is in place, or if they raise corporate taxes, one of the campaign promises that Biden made, and he's broken many of them, of course, but one of them he's trying to break, we'll put it that way, is he said that no person earning more than $400,000 would have their taxes increased. Well, if the economic study after economic study shows that if you raise corporate taxes, about 70% of that is passed on to the consumer, which means everyone who buys stuff, that's all of us, are going to pay about 70% of that tax hike. That affects everybody of all income levels. So how is it that folks over 400,000, he's saying folks over 400,000 will not pay taxes? They're counting on financial illiteracy. They're counting on people not connecting the dots. And I'm counting on people connecting the dots. I think the majority of Americans do understand when you raise taxes on corporations, the corporations don't pay the tax, their customers do, or the majority of it. So therefore, it's us. We pay the tax. Companies don't pay taxes. Just like the government doesn't create jobs or have any money. They get money from us, the taxpayers, or they print it, which creates inflation, which means everything costs more and we pay more for that. They don't create jobs. They just create either incentives or disincentive for jobs based on how involved they are in getting in our way, basically. They're actually an impediment to jobs. The less government, the more jobs. Now, some of the solutions. Clearly, our federal government, particularly the Democrats, want to create more surveillance. They want to track our transactions far more. So one of the solutions is to reduce your bank footprint. Now, I've been talking about this a lot for a lot of folks lately. And what it means is you do less transactions with your bank. Obviously, if you receive income, let's say it's a salary or business income or whatever, you need to deposit it somewhere. That income's going to come into your bank. That's fine. You're going to report that on your tax return anyway. It's going to show up as a 1099 or a W-2 in most cases, right? And that's fine because it's getting reported to the IRS anyway. The bank records match that up anyway. What they don't need to know is all the other stuff that's going on. Why do they need to know about all your other transactions? Well, if you then transfer for example, here's a really interesting solution. If you transfer those funds then into a personal bank policy, then access the fund to earn dividends. Like I said, we have companies paying 5.75 to 6% dividends even today. Been paying those rates or higher for decades, literally. Never miss a dividend since before the Civil War, literally. And then you access the funds through a bank line of credit and you're getting charged less in interest than you're earning in dividends. You create there's not a bank transaction trail there, or much less so, we'll put it that way. And guess what? You are going to have a situation where you create positive arbitrage, which means you're going to make more money. Okay? So your personal bank could be a solution to gain more control of your money, gain more privacy on your money, and oh, by the way, you'll make more money because of positive arbitrage. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, many of the wealthy operate this way already. And so in a sense, folks that don't understand the rules are going to get run over by the rules and they're going to get, burned. But these new rules, as they come about and come into play, may force some people into smarter ways to operate with their money anyway. Isn't that interesting? So if you want to learn more information about how that works, of course, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. And I'm going to recommend you stay tuned to the next segment. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, a couple more issues, and some more solutions of what we can do to protect ourselves. So again, stay tuned. Don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to Your Personal Bank Show. We're talking about various proposals tied to the Build Back and Better plan that are going to have significant impacts on us economically. You see, this bill is so massive. I've been told it's the largest spending bill in the history of man. That very likely is true. And there's so much to it. So something I've heard over 2,000 pages, more than 2 King James Bibles, for example. It's taken time to read through all these things, and some of the things in there are eye-opening. Remember, the Democrats were telling us they wanted to have everybody pay their fair share, and they were going after millionaires and billionaires. Yet in the bill, they're proposing that banks report to the IRS every transaction at $600 or greater. Folks, that's not going after millionaires and billionaires. That's going after everybody, just about. That's ridiculous. And there's been some pushback on that, and they're talking about changing that amount. But the reality, it's not about the amount. It's about the principle. The IRS has no business, no legal right to be looking into people's financial bank accounts, getting reported, spying on people who are doing nothing wrong. Unless they're doing something wrong and they have a valid reason for doing so, like a court order, suspicion, and valid evidence, they should, in my opinion, have no business looking into people's bank accounts for no reason. They don't need to be spying. We've talked about the corporate tax hike. They're still holding out. The Democrats want the corporate tax hike. If you raise taxes on corporations, corporations do not pay taxes. Their consumers do. About 70% of any given tax hike is passed on to consumers. What's the other 30%? Most of that? Lost wages, less jobs. They hire less people, folks. So either employees are going to pay less or have fewer jobs, or consumers are going to pay, and consumers are going to pay more. The corporations don't pay the taxes, folks. Hopefully that's something people understand. That's a basic financial literacy thing that folks need to understand. Another thing that folks need to understand is the government doesn't have any money, nor do they create jobs. The government gets money from taxpayers or prints it, which creates inflation. And they don't create jobs. They just get in or out of the way of businesses who create the jobs. Now, there's another one. Here's a change in this proposed bill. This should get some people's attention. They want to add political directives to 401k plans. Now, what does that mean? Let's talk about that one just a bit further. In other words, they're proposing a rule change that political directives, environmental, social, and government objectives would, in fact, be a part or required to be part of 401ks. And it would basically, add that little notice. It's a little notice proposal, of course, and it would add political directives to your retirement savings. So in other words, they say it makes the rule easier for retirement plans to offer 401ks focused on environment, social, and governance objectives. Actually, the rule coerces workers and businesses into supporting progressive policies. In other words, more money is going to get funneled into businesses that are progressive. And by the way, progressive is a misnomer. Folks that are called themselves progressives, politicians or whatever, or are not progressives. They're actually regressives because they're proposing to change our government to a lesser form of government, less free. Democracy is actually progressive. When our founding fathers created a representative republic, a democracy, that was game-changing. That was the great experiment. That was wildly progressive. Dictatorships, top-down bureaucracies, big, strong governments have been around forever. Monarchies, dictatorships, and people having less freedom, those are lesser forms of government. Progressives should be called regressives. The bottom line is this rule, if included, and unfortunately because there's so much to this bill, and this is such a small part of it, what it amounts to, it's a backdoor rewrite of ERISA, which is the law that created the IRA and the 401k in the first place. And they're moving to steer private capital to implement an agenda they can't pass through Congress. More of your savings will be constricted to advance the progressive agenda, whether you like it or not. In other words, more of the monies will be steered towards regressive ideas and policies. So in other words, if they can't win it by law, they're going to win it by funding it. They're going to steer more dollars towards whatever their agenda is. Folks, this Build Back Better America plan is a wholesale attack on the form of government and society that we've enjoyed for over 200 years. It was written by Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a committed and openly admits to being a communist. Bernie Sanders spent his honeymoon in Russia in the 1970s. Not a particularly warm and friendly time between the U.S. and Russia. I think it was in the early 70s. My point is quite simple. A communist wrote this bill. A communist wants to fundamentally change our society and wants to attack it from every angle possible, from requiring banks to surveil us, IRS, requiring banks to notify the IRS of transactions so the IRS can surveil us on a regular daily basis. Again, very communistic, very Marxist. Okay? They want to change the 401k rules to steer more money towards progressive, what they call progressive, I call regressive ideas. Okay? They want to raise taxes on corporations, which means corporations don't pay taxes. They pass them on to their consumers, or lower expenses, hire fewer people, or pay people less. These are all things that give the government more control and individuals less. Whenever you give a right to the government, you're taking away a right from the people. It's that simple, folks. And this bill does everything in its possible, just about everything possible to rewrite our society. What the mistake I think a lot of people are making is they're getting hung up on the size of the bill. Yes, it's a monstrosity. It's $3.5 trillion. It might get whittled down. That's a good thing in terms of the total amount. But it's far more than that. It's not just about the amount of money the government wants to spend, which would, in my opinion, cause even more inflation going forward. Obviously would increase taxes on basically just about everybody, either directly or indirectly. We're all going to pay more, create more inflation because of all this extra spending. But it will be being under almost constant surveillance by the IRS. Remember, they're going to triple their budget, more than that, so that they have the capability of putting us under almost constant surveillance. It has so many far-reaching consequences, and I'm just focusing on mostly the financial ones at the moment. There's others that are built into this thing that are far beyond what 80% plus of Americans want. This is not, I repeat, this is not what the vast, vast majority of Americans want. It would be disastrous, and the only thing holding it up is 2 senators at this point. And one, Manchin is holding out for the amount that's being spent. It doesn't seem like so much about what's in it, although he doesn't want a carbon tax and a few things like that because he comes from a coal state. Okay, but he doesn't seem to have a whole lot. Manchin is not the conservative people try to make him out to be. He's just not as far liberal as many of the other Democrat senators are. Sinema actually is more conservative by stating she doesn't want to increase taxes, period. That's a far more conservative standpoint, okay? We need to support Manchin and Sinema at every way possible. Notify them, contact them, let them know how you feel. If you never reached out to a representative or senator before in your life, if there was ever a time, now is it. Do it. Contact them, let them know how you feel. And this, I guess the thought I want to finish up with on today is, what I find is incredibly sad is the majority, I think just about every Democratic congressperson has signed on in this bill. They're all in favor of a bill written by Bernie Sanders, a communist. They're in favor of a communist bill. 48 senators, Democratic senators, are on board with a communist bill written by a communist, openly admit. See, I don't have an issue with Bernie Sanders, really. I don't agree with him, but I don't have any issue with him because at least he's honest. He's up front. He'll tell you he's a communist. He's not even a Democrat, folks. He's an independent. So here we have an independent communist who's dictating the direction of the Democratic Party, and most of them are happy to be called progressives, which again, they're not. They're regressives. We have 2 senators that are not willing to sign, 2 Democratic senators not willing to go with the flow on all of this. I mean, recently, Biden had a meeting with what he called the progressives, again, regressives, and the moderate Democrats. It was interesting with the senators trying to come to some kind of compromise. And what was interesting is in the meeting, the progressive meeting, there were too many senators to count. Most of the 48 Democratic senators were in this meeting. The moderate Democrat meeting had 2 senators, Sinema and Manchin. What has happened to our Democratic Party? The vast, vast majority of Americans don't want communism, yet we have a bill written by a communist and 48 senators are on board and almost pretty much all of the Congress people, the Democratic ones. What happened? Why are there only 2 somewhat moderate senators left in the Democratic Party? Folks, this is not what the majority of Americans want. Even the majority of Democrats don't want this. Certainly the majority of Americans don't want. There's no way to argue that one way or the other. how did we get so far down this path in terms of at least the leadership, the bureaucrats and all that? How did we allow them to get so far down this path? They'd be so out of touch of what Americans want. Complacency certainly is part of it. Obviously, they feel there's some benefit, there's some reward for doing what they do. Obviously, if they're in a position of leadership, like being a congressperson or a senator, and this stuff does pass, they're going to gain a lot more power. The government's going to grow even exponentially more than it is already currently, which in my opinion is far too large. And it's going to more power, creates more money, more influence, all that. So they have, frankly, kind of a direct benefit. Folks, we got to get serious about financial responsibility in our elected representatives and our bureaucratic representatives. We got to demand our government respond to us, not the other way around. There is challenges. There are things you're doing, but you need to look into either supporting a candidate that agrees with your financial literacy or financial responsibility and things like this, or run yourself. It's time to get involved. It's time to stand up. It's time to contact our representatives so that you can so we can continue to have a future much like we had a past. This was the land of opportunity. People flocked here from all over the world for centuries for a better life for them and their family and future generations. Are we going to allow the dreams of our forefathers to be washed away and destroyed? That's the big question. We're going to see what happens here over the next year or so. The midterm elections are big, but there's a lot of things for us to do before then. If you have any questions, contact me toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com, and I'll show you how to gain more privacy with your money, more control, reduce your taxes, reduce market risk, and gain positive arbitrage, which means you'll have more money in your pocket, plain and simple.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.